At the start of April 1940, both Britain and Germany were on the verge of taking military action against Norway, as a result of the Outmark incident which we first discussed in our previous video. It was the Germans who ended up striking first, launching invasions of both Norway and its southern neighbour Denmark in an audacious, high-risk attack codenamed Operation Weserubüng. The German plan aimed to occupy both nations at the same time, landing at locations ranging from Narvik in the north to Copenhagen in the south. This would be accompanied by a ground invasion into Jutland and airborne landings in southern Norway, particularly around Oslo and Stavanger, to secure air bases for use by the Luftwaffe. 5 divisions, including the elite 3rd Mountain Division, would be deployed to Norway and 3 more to Denmark. These would be supported by over 500 combat Luftwaffe aircraft and the entire German Navy. It was a truly combined arms operation. To succeed, speed and surprise were paramount. If the governments of Norway and Denmark could be captured on the first day and made to capitulate, then the Allies wouldn't stand any chance of reinforcing Norway and contesting it at all. However, seizing both nations at once required the Kriegsmarine to stretch its ships across a vast area. If the element of surprise was lost, then Royal Navy ships based at Scapa Flow and at Rosyth might have easily enough firepower to deal a crippling blow to German naval power. It was a risk, but one that the Germans were committed to taking. On March 4th, they began to hold all ships, including submarines, in port to prepare for the invasion. From this point on, the German plan was beyond the point of no return. The invasion would need to be carried out sooner rather than later, as every day the U-boat spent in port was a day not spent sinking Atlantic shipping. The invasion date was therefore set for April 9th. On the Allied side, planning for intervention in Norway proceeded at a slower pace than in Germany, frustrated by the need to agree a course of action not only in London but in Paris too. After months of deliberations, it wasn't until the end of March that a viable plan for intervention in Scandinavia was agreed between the Allies. At the continued urging of Winston Churchill, the British and French governments agreed to mine Norwegian waters to disrupt shipments of iron ore to Germany from Narvik. In addition, the Allies formulated Plan R4, which assumed that the Germans would react to the mining operation with a move of some kind against Norway. If this happened, then troops would be shipped across the North Sea to secure the ports of Narvik, Trondheim and Bergen before the Germans could. And so, on April 7th, the British began to lay mines off the Norwegian coast, with a force of 17 destroyers covered by the battlecruiser Renown. By the time this operation began, however, the first German ships involved in Weserubüng had already left port. To ferry the required troops to Norway, the Germans had divided their ships into 5 task forces, each of which would capture an important Norwegian port on the morning of April 9th. The extreme distance to the northern ports of Trondheim and Narvik meant that Task Forces 1 and 2 left Wilhelmshaven at 5 AM on April 7th, racing northwards together under the command of Admiral Günther Lütjens. To underline the importance of securing Norway's northern ports, this fleet included Germany's only 2 modern battleships, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, as well as the modern heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper. These 3 ships were to escort 14 destroyers packed with 3,700 troops to their destinations, and then return to Germany thereafter. Indeed, the head of the Kriegsmarine, Erik Raeder, was keen to have all of his ships return to Germany as soon as possible, concerned at the enormous superiority at sea that the Royal Navy held. Raeder was right to be worried. Facing Germany during Weserubüng was the core strength of the most powerful navy on Earth. At Scapa Flow was the home fleet, built around the capital ships Rodney, Valiant and Repulse, and commanded by Admiral Sir Charles Forbes. In addition, the British had 3 cruiser squadrons active in the North Sea, Renown's force off Norway, and additional ships on the River Clyde slated to assist in Plan R4. It was an immense concentration of naval power that could reach the coast of Norway in under 10 hours. Avoiding detection by the British for as long as possible would therefore be critical to the success of the expeditions to Norway's northern ports. Sadly for the Germans, within hours disaster struck. Shortly before 9 AM, a British reconnaissance plane spotted the fleet and relayed its position to the Admiralty. At 1:30 PM, a group of 12 Bristol Blenheim bombers followed up this sighting with an attack, which did no damage but made it clear that the British knew the Germans were at sea. Despite this, the Admiralty reacted slowly. Reports from the bombers did not reach Admiral Forbes until 5:30 PM, and the British Home Fleet did not leave port until 8:15 PM, almost 12 hours after the initial sighting. At this point, the British made a critical error. Believing that the intention of the German fleet was to break out into the Atlantic to harass merchant shipping in the way that the Graf Spee had done the previous autumn, the Home Fleet proceeded northeast to cut the Germans off, rather than steaming southwards to intercept them around Norway. This judgment was a strange one, considering that reconnaissance had shown that destroyers were among the German fleet, ships that had nothing like the fuel needed to sustain a breakout into the Atlantic. The possibility that these ships might be engaged in an invasion of Norway, especially one as far north as Narvik and Trondheim, appears to have been discounted at this stage. British naval superiority was, surely, too great for such a move to be attempted. This error in reading the intentions of the Germans was compounded when the Admiralty deployed all of its other forces according to the same assumption. The 2nd and 18th Cruiser Squadrons were ordered to take up position in the middle of the North Sea, while the aircraft carrier Glorious and battleship Warspite were ordered to join Forbes' Home Fleet, sailing north from the River Clyde. Most significantly, Plan R4 was immediately abandoned, precisely when it would have been of most use. The ships of the 1st Cruiser Squadron in Rosyth were directly ordered by Winston Churchill to hurriedly disembark all the troops planned for use in Norway and rush to link up with Forbes' Home Fleet. This order threw away a golden chance to get troops into strategic ports in Norway before the Germans could. The mistaken assumption that the Germans were attempting a breakout crippled British decision making during this crucial period. As the British chased shadows, the German invasion fleets proceeded towards their destinations. The weather was very bad overnight on the 7th, and both British and German ships became badly scattered. In the early hours, the British destroyer Glowworm, attached to Renowned Squadron, stumbled into Task Force 2 and found herself head-to-head with Admiral Hipper. Hopelessly outmatched and unable to escape, Glowworm reported Hipper's position and then rammed the 18,000-ton heavy cruiser, shearing off 100 feet of Hipper's armour plating and causing herself to blow up and sink. Glowworm's captain, Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop, would go on to be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for his and the entire ship's company's gallantry in taking on Hipper. Glowworm's report of Admiral Hipper's position was confirmed later that day when a seaplane spotted the cruiser and her destroyers heading west near Trondheim. Admiral Forbes, unaware that these ships were simply steering aimlessly and awaiting orders to enter Trondheim, took their course as a further indication that they were attempting to break out into the Atlantic, and altered course further away from Norway to cut them off. The way to Trondheim was left clear, and early the following morning the port would be taken without so much as a shot being fired. In the far north, Narvik also found itself unguarded by the British, as Rear Admiral William Whitworth, in command of Renown, steamed westwards. Having received reports that the ships spotted by Glowworm earlier in the day were only part of the German fleet and that more could be heading his way, he moved to intercept. As the weather deteriorated once more into the evening of April 8th, Whitworth continued to move west, also convinced that a breakout attempt to the Atlantic was underway. By the time Whitworth turned his squadron around in the early hours of April 9th, it was already too late. 10 German destroyers had already begun their approach to Narvik. As the German ships approached the port, they were challenged by 2 aging, hopelessly outgunned Norwegian patrol ships, the Norge and Eidsvold. When the Norwegian ships refused to surrender, the Germans launched torpedoes. Of 184 men on board Eidsvold, only 8 survived. By dawn on April 9th, Narvik was in German hands, and the invasion of Norway was well and truly underway. Further south, Task Forces 3 and 4, led by the light cruisers Köln, Königsberg and Karlsruhe, ran into more difficulties than their northern counterparts. Fire from Norwegian shore batteries proved effective, badly damaging the Königsberg at Bergen and actually forcing Task Force 4 at Kristiansand to retreat twice before a Luftwaffe bombing raid finally allowed Karlsruhe to reach the town. Nonetheless, both ports were occupied on April 9th, just a few hours behind schedule. More good news for the Germans came from Sola Airfield near Stavanger, which was captured by German airborne troops in the first operation of its kind anywhere in the world. As Norway's largest airfield, Sola would virtually assure Luftwaffe air superiority over Norway so long as it remained in German hands. This just left Oslo, which Task Force 5 was supposed to have captured before sunrise. This didn't happen after the lead ship of the group, the brand new heavy cruiser Blucher, was sunk by shellfire and torpedoes from the Oscarsborg naval fortress inside Oslofjord. Rather than arriving before daybreak and capturing the Norwegian government, the Germans were forced to land their troops almost 50 miles south of the capital. By the time they arrived in the afternoon, Oslo was deserted, with the Norwegian royal family and government having retreated inland along with the country's gold reserves. It was a narrow escape and a substantial setback for Operation Weserubüng. Still, by the end of April 9th, the Germans controlled all of Norway's major ports and airfields and had successfully capitulated Denmark in a conquest that took just 3 hours to complete. For Erik Raeder and the Kriegsmarine, their participation was at an end, but the danger was not. All of the ships deployed to Norway still had to make it back to Germany unharmed. For some, such as the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst, this was achieved without any further incident, but others ran immediately into trouble. On April 9th, the cruiser Karlsruhe was torpedoed and sunk whilst leaving Kristiansand, and Königsberg was hit and sunk by 5 100-pound bombs whilst leaving Bergen. 2 days later, the pocket battleship Lützow was damaged so severely by another British torpedo that it had to be towed back to Germany. At Narvik, things were no better for the Germans. On April 10th, the Royal Navy counterattacked with 5 destroyers led by Captain Bernard Warburton Lee. Taking their opponents by surprise, the British briefly held numerical superiority, confronted by only 2 German destroyers. Both were sunk in quick succession, including the ship of the German commander, Captain Friedrich Bönther, who went down with his ship. Exploiting their success, the British destroyers turned their fire on German supply ships at anchor in Narvik, destroying much of the equipment needed by the German troops on land. Before long, Warburton Lee's destroyers were counterattacked by the other 8 German destroyers situated around Narvik, and his ships made a fighting retreat westwards. 2 British destroyers were sunk in the ensuing battle, including Warburton Lee's flagship Hardy, mortally wounding the British commander. Both Warburton Lee and Bönther would be posthumously awarded medals for gallantry by their respective nations. As the remaining Royal Navy ships retreated, they were intercepted by 2 German U-boats, but all of the torpedoes launched missed. Indeed, throughout the Norwegian campaign, Germany's U-boats proved remarkably ineffective, due to the magnetic detonator system their torpedoes employed. At higher latitudes, these continually failed to go off when required. The British escaped and were not gone for long. 3 days later, wanting the remaining German ships at Narvik cleared, the Admiralty dispatched Vice Admiral Whitworth, now on board the battleship Warspite, into the fjords alongside 9 fresh destroyers. With the German ships low on fuel after their supplies were blown up, there was no way to escape the 15-inch guns of Warspite in such narrow confines. All 8 German destroyers were sunk or scuttled by their crew, and Warspite's catapult aircraft even managed to bomb and sink the submarine U-64. It was a decisive victory for the Royal Navy, and German losses at Narvik were equal to half of their entire destroyer fleet. Across Norway, the Kriegsmarine's losses in the days after Weserubüng were crippling. What ships had escaped without being sunk had been damaged, and the end result was that by June 1940 the Germans would have just 1 heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers ready for action. Everything else was either sunk or being repaired. At sea, Germany had paid the price for going toe-to-toe with the largest navy in the world, and had suffered losses which it had no hope of replacing with new ships. On land, however, things were looking much better for the Germans, and much, much worse for the Allies. The battle for Norway was only just beginning, and in the next video, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. This video has been made possible by support on Patreon, and I'm immensely grateful to all those that have helped me dedicate more time and resources to these videos. If you enjoyed today's video and want to see more and better Historiograph videos produced in the future, consider joining their ranks.